Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Semi-Pro. I hope you all had a very nice holiday and a happy new year. My name is Josh Clements, or Brit Edit.
And I am Dalton Barrett, aka Barrett Digital. Josh, I want you to know that you did that so fast. It made me so happy. That was your best intro so far.
Starting off the new year to a good start.
No, it's not. We're talking about Wonder Woman 84.
The most divisive film in the DCEU since Batman vs. Superman.
I'd say every film in the DCEU has been divisive. Wonder Woman was divisive a few months after it came out, because when it came out, people were like, wait, this movie is actually half decent? That's incredible. And then everybody loved it, but then when they rewatched it, they were like, oh no, it's fine. One of the things that I liked about Black Mask in Birds of Prey and Pedro Pascal, his Max Lord in this movie, probably a little less so in this movie, and we'll get into that a little later. Just so you know, full spoilers for Wonder Woman 84. One of the things that I particularly like is the lack of sympathy for the villain, because we don't see that anymore. Now there's always, every villain's got to have a sympathetic origin, and they've got to do this and this, and we want to feel bad for them, and we want to feel the emotion that comes with it all, or whatever. But we've seen so much of that, and it's been perfected so well. I just want to see a bad guy who's evil because he's evil. Because you're not going to top, Thanos in Wonder Woman 84. You're just not going to do it. So let's just get a villain who's evil for the sake of being evil, which I think Max Lord was to an extent. They gave him some sympathy and whatever, but for the most part, he was just a bad guy because he was a bad guy. Like, there was no sort of trying to redeem him or trying to make him sympathetic. There was no like, oh, he's got his own reasonings, he thinks he's the good guy. No, he just was evil because he was evil. He wanted the world.
Yes and no. Okay, before we jump into any kind of proper discussion, do you want to just say whether or not you actually liked Wonder Woman 84?
Yes, and I did like Wonder Woman 84. I actually kind of loved Wonder Woman 84. I mean, the movie's not taking home any awards or anything. I don't think it's some stellar film, but it hits all the right notes. I found it very enjoyable. I found it somewhat refreshing in the, I guess, kind of modern world of comic book movies. I found it refreshing that it tried to do some things different. I found those things interesting. I don't know that everyone did. I should preface this by saying I did see the movie in a theater. And from, most of the people I've talked to who saw it in a theater really liked the movie. Most of the people I talked to who saw it at home didn't like it as much. So I do think my experience was benefited by seeing it in a theater, but I did really enjoy the movie. What about you, Josh?
Well, so I just got off watching the movie about a couple of hours ago now. I don't think it's the worst thing to ever exist. I don't think it's the greatest thing to ever exist. I think it's very mediocre. Like, straight down the line. It's not great. It's not awful. It's got some good moments and it's got some bad moments. But for the most part, it's just kind of alright. With that said, I watched it on a totally legitimate streaming service. Because HBO Max has definitely released over here. And they made a great business choice of releasing all their movies on HBO Max or in cinemas, where we can't go because I'm currently locked down again for the fourth time. So I watched it on a legitimate streaming service called 123 Movies. But I admittedly was not that interested in the movie when it started, but it gave me back towards the third act. The end of the second act kind of brought me back a lot. But it's fun. It's not awful. It's pretty fun for the most part when it's not boring.
See, I didn't find much of the movie boring, and I completely agree with you when it's like, this movie is fine. It checks the boxes. It does the things it needs to do. It's a very efficient movie. Like, they very efficiently, I say that it's 2.5 hours long, but it's a very efficient movie. It like I said, it checks the boxes it needs to check, and it does the things it needs to do, and it does those things passably. However, what I think lifts it just a little bit above that is how much different the sort of the overarching entirety of the movie is from the majority of comic book media. And I said this after I got out of the movie, a movie that I'm a big fan of and that I see a lot more people coming around to now, but, you know, is Superman Returns. And people have the same complaint that you have about Wonder Woman 84, that Superman Returns is boring. But the thing I like about Superman Returns is, first and foremost, it's not an action movie or it's not a superhero movie. First and foremost, it's a love story. And I feel like Wonder Woman 84 has a lot of elements of that, especially in the, you know, the second act kind of, well, most of the second act, it feels more like a love story between Steve and Diana, which, unlike Superman Returns, they knew when to say, all right, that's enough of the love story. Let's have an action scene. And then, okay, the action scene's over. Let's develop this love story a little more. Okay, that's enough of that. Another action scene. So I felt like because of that, it sort of took the Superman Returns formula where it is, first and foremost, a love story and secondary an action movie, but it did that in a way that felt a lot more balanced than the way Superman Returns did it. And for that that's a big part of the reason that I enjoy this movie so much, is because it's not just like Ant-Man and the Wasp is an example that everybody uses all the time. It's the most generic, middle of the line comic book movie that has ever existed. There's nothing bad about it particularly. There's nothing stellar about it particularly. It's just fine. And Wonder Woman 84 is just fine, but then I think it's lifted just a step above by the fact that its plot is so much different.
Its plot is actually, it's probably what took it away from me in terms of the things I enjoyed. Because, now we talked a bit about this before, Chris Pine has fantastic charisma and charm and just a great chemistry with Gal Gadot. And I think if it wasn't for that, I would have disliked this movie a lot more. Like that through line of him and Wonder Woman's story worked quite well for me. It was just everything else that happened around it that didn't.
Yeah, I really like the Steve Trevor plot, which is the thing I was going into this movie thinking I was going to hate the most, was Steve Trevor coming back, and I was like, that's going to be so stupid. But I liked the way they handled it. And I liked I'll get your opinions on this, the Spider-Man 2 trope, you know, the trope that Spider-Man 2 started, where the hero loses their powers halfway through the movie and has to get them back somehow to save the day at the end, which Superman 2 did as well. So I guess Superman 2 started that trend. But I enjoyed that, and I liked, once again, because like you said, Chris Pine and Gal Gadot have great chemistry together. And I don't know if it's just because I like Chris Pine or because they actually have good chemistry together, but watching them, that was my favorite part of the movie. And that was my favorite part of the first movie too.
So this comes into one of the reasons why I like the first movie more. See, the first movie to me has, despite its setting, a much more localized story. It's just about Diana, like Diana and Steve Trevor. Basically, it's like, you know, it's about their relationship and how it prospers and evolves, and ultimately his sacrifice amongst the idea of men being good over men being evil. And I liked that sort of toned down, smaller story in comparison to this film, where like, it did the thing that I'm not as big a fan of with comic book movies, like you said, because I think every movie does it, where it's like the entire world is at risk, and if they fail, then the nukes will go off and everyone dies. And it's just, to me, I prefer that kind of toned down story. It's just more refreshing. It's more niche.
I agree with you. That's my least favorite part of the movie, but I had the same issue with the first movie because it was kind of the same thing with Ares as the villain.
Well, I think both films suffer from underdeveloped villains.
Yes, well, because I think Maxwell Lord is a great villain in this movie, and he's so much fun to watch. The villain's plots is where the faults come in.
Well, I mean, I was thinking more. I think I was talking more about Cheetah. She seems very. Well, we need to throw in Cheetah because people like Cheetah.
Yeah, I think the because this movie's too long. Let's get that let's get that out of the way right now, right here and right now. Wonder Woman in '84 is 2.5 hours long, and it does not need to be. No movie needs to be that long. It just doesn't. And the cheetah plot is the thing from this movie that I would say just take it out, save it for later. Or take out the Maxwell Lord plot and save that for later. But I preferred the Maxwell Lord plot, so let's do that one now. Like, I get them kind of wanting to weave them both in and having the two villains. But Cheetah was fine. There was nothing particularly wrong. It's not like a Spider-Man 3 situation where it's too many villains and none of them get adequate screen time. They both get adequate screen time. The movie's just too long. And Cheetah's character comes up somewhat pointless in the grand scheme of things, even though she was fine. And I really like Kristen Wiig's performance too, but it just felt like there was no reason for her to be there. Had she been given an actual reason to be there and was the main villain of the movie, you could do pretty much everything in her story the same and it would still be fine. But I think you could just rip that whole thing out and shave off like 45 minutes of this movie and it would benefit from that. But I do think Maxwell Lord was so good that he carried a lot of this movie for me. Because we know Gal Gadot is not carrying this movie for me. Pedro Pascal as Maxwell Lord was fantastic.
Yeah. He's the best part of the movie.
Well, it's once again, and I think I said this to you, this is like what is this? Her fourth appearance? This is the fourth time that Wonder Woman has been the worst part of the movie that she's in. Like, Wonder Woman was the worst written character in Justice League. She was the worst written, she was pointless in BVS. Like, I get they wanted to throw her in, but there was no reason to have her there. She was the worst part of the first movie. Like, I don't know why Wonder Woman is, and I'm not even talking about Gal Gadot's acting, because I don't think it's any secret that she's not the greatest actress. But even outside of that, her character isn't written particularly interesting at all anytime she's appeared, and I think this is probably her weakest outing, and it's definitely Gadot's weakest outing from an acting point of view.
Yeah, that part's definitely true. Well, it's like, so the opening of this movie, outside of the weirdly pointless Themyscira stuff that doesn't seem to exist.
I loved that scene, though.
I like the scene, it was just pointless and seemed out of place.
And it was, that's one of those things where it was like, I think it kind of trying to keep tonally with the first movie where it opened in Themyscira. I don't mind it. I think it's neat. I think the idea behind it was to show that if you cheat to get, I mean, it was thematically, if you cheat to get your way.
The cheating stuff where she's like, you can't be a liar and be a winner or something like that.
Right. Yeah, I think that's what it was. It's, this is the lesson. But you can't teach Diana anything in the movie. You can't develop her character. So they just did it retroactively at the beginning when she was a child, I guess.
Well, like so the actual opening to the movie is these people robbing a mall. Like they rob a jewelry store that's a front for a black marketplace, and that ends up kicking off the whole story. But these guys rob them all, and one guy just grabs like a child.
Yeah,
I didn't understand this. Yeah, because he grabs a child and like he's dangling her over an edge, and he's like, "I'm not going back, man." It's like, you're gonna kill a child. Like, what's your plan there?
Yeah, he went from from robbery
to murder.
to murdering a child. Yeah, I agree there. And it also wasn't necessary for Diana to stop the criminals for him to threaten this child. Like, it was just so out of place.
This was just cops, like mall cops.
Right.
This was Paul Blart.
Yeah, that part was odd, but I like that action set piece was neat.
Well, the action set piece is neat, but it's also, I think, my biggest issue with Wonder Woman at this point, where she is a god. Like, you can't touch her, really. So whenever there's a fight scene or anything like that, I don't feel any stress.
Well, people toss around the term Mary Sue a lot, and I hate that term, just because I think it has to do, people don't like something, so they're like, oh, the main character is a Mary Sue, and that always gets on my nerves. That is, in essence, what, like, if you had a definite character of that, it would be Wonder Woman, and not just in the sense of, like, you can't stop her, because you really can't. In the sense of the biggest problem that her character has, I think, that we've seen in the DCEU so far is she doesn't learn anything. The first movie, you have her adjusting to human culture. So she kind of learns that. But she doesn't learn anything about bettering herself because she's already perfect. And it's the same thing here in this movie where Diana's pretty much already perfect. And because of that, her character can't go through any development because she's already where she needs to be. And that is probably the biggest flaw with Wonder Woman's character in these movies, is that you can't do anything with her. The only thing you could do in this movie, which thank goodness they did, or it would have been much more uninteresting, is have her lose her powers. And that's all you can do. Like with Superman, because people bring up this with Superman a lot, like, yes, he's super powerful and it's hard to stop him without kryptonite, but you could do emotional stories with Superman, right? Like you can, unless he's written like he is in the DCEU, you can do stories where he grows as a person because he is raised as a human with a conscience and all those kind of things. So you can do those types of stories, whereas with Wonder Woman, the way she's written in these movies, you can't. There's no room for growth as a character. And that's what I see your point completely, where it's like she comes in and kills these guys. I mean, I know she doesn't actually kill them, but she throws them out of the third story of a building onto a cop car and it shatters, and sure, they move afterwards, but she just murders these guys. And then
it's the Batman syndrome of, I'm not going to kill you, but I'm going to make you pay $400,000 in medical fees.
Right. I'm going to make you commit suicide because you can't afford your medical bills. But I like the opening in Themyscira. I like this. And then I like the stuff where we kind of see what Diana's been doing just in day-to-day life. I was really hoping to get a little more, because that's kind of the next scene, really. You have the Themyscira scene, and then you have that kind of set piece in the mall where nobody calls her Wonder Woman, and she just shows up to stop some... I do like that, though, that they actually did show her, you know, not just dealing with these huge world-ending threats. Like, it's sort of the thing that Raimi did well in his movies, where it was like, yes, we'll show Spider-Man stopping Doc Ock from destroying the city, but we'll also show him, you know, just saving people. Like, we'll show him in a montage.
Kids from getting hit by a car.
Absolutely. And I really like those aspects in comic book movies, because we don't really see them, especially as much anymore, and especially in these DCEU movies, we barely see those scenes. Like, they do their big thing and then they're done. And so I liked seeing that. And then the next thing we cut to is Diana at work, and she works as an archaeologist, which I think is neat. I don't know if there's comic backing for that. I don't read Wonder Woman comics, so I don't know if that's her job in the comics or not. But I like the setting of the office there. I like kind of the atmosphere that it creates. Like the people who were there kind of bounced off each other well. I wish they had dived a little bit more into that. Whereas, like, if you're going to have her be an archaeologist, like Indiana Jones, this guy, like, take this movie and have her go on, like, an archaeological dig or whatever. Like,
that would have been a great way to introduce the Wishing Stone. So, like, I think they specifically mentioned that it came, the last time it was seen was in Mayan culture, which would be like, would have been great to see her go to this place and like uncover it and try and document it and everything. I think if there's one thing that the live action DCU has done well, it's putting her as an archaeologist, because I think that makes a lot of sense considering who she is. In the comics, she was, I'm trying to remember here, I think she was a like army nurse for a while, and then she became a military officer. Then she kind of bounced around to just kind of being an employee and a businesswoman and stuff like that. And then last time, remember, I think she worked at the UN.
Okay.
Maybe for Themyscira, but I think just in general, kind of keeping tabs open.
Gotcha. Well, I really like the archaeology thing, and I think that's a really neat thing to explore in the future. I would love to see an Indiana Jones style adventure movie with Wonder Woman. I think that would be a whole lot of fun, and you could kind of put some of those character complaints that we talked about at the beginning kind of in the background, because Indiana Jones is close to a perfect character. He normally doesn't learn anything in his movies. It's all about the adventure, and I think that would be neat to explore with Diana's character. How weird is it that this wishing stone that's been through all of these major cultures was in the back room of a shop at the mall?
Yeah. Well, that was something I was thinking about when I was watching the movie. I was just watching. I was like, wait, how does Maxwell Lord come in? And from what I can tell, he comes in because Cheetah uses the wishing stone to be wanted, essentially.
See, I'm pretty sure Maxwell Lord was looking for the wishing stone before. They never explicitly say that, but he keeps telling people he has a plan, and then he knows about the wishing stone already. He's looking for the wishing stone and gets it from Cheetah. So I'm pretty sure he was looking for it beforehand. Now, how he found out about it, I have no idea. But I'm pretty sure that was like part of his plan always involved the wishing stone. I'm pretty sure. But I saw this movie on Christmas Day, so you've seen it more recently than me.
Yeah, well, I don't remember. I remember him saying he has a plan and stuff like that, which was great. And I liked, so I think you mentioned this before, I like that when they bring it out, a guy walks past and is like, man, I wish I had a cup of coffee. And someone walks in and like, oh, I got this cup of coffee for so-and-so, but they're out today. And he's like, I'll take it. And he drinks, it's too hot. And it's just a great, I would have loved for more of those like little gags where people wish for just really minute stuff and it bites them in the back.
Yeah, I would need to rewatch it. I'm sure there's more than, it would be weird if they just put in one, right? Like it would be weird if there was only one thing. I'm sure there's more.
Happens to is a British comedian, which I also found slightly odd because he's pretty big here. It felt weird to give him a bit part in the movie out of anyone.
Well, I had no idea who he was, so that may have played something into it. Another thing that's odd, and maybe you can explain this because you've seen it more recently than me. I didn't think about this until somewhat recently. So when Maxwell Lord, once again, we're in spoilers, so if you've been listening this far and didn't hear us say that we're talking spoilers, we're talking spoilers. When Maxwell Lord becomes the Wishing Stone, because that's sort of the catalyst that sets off this movie, is Maxwell Lord... he wishes to, he does the classic genie story, which really, if you think about this movie is a genie story, which I'm kind of a sucker for anyway. I've always liked the idea that, I've always liked that sort of mythology where you ask for a wish, but it doesn't always work out. There's two sides to every coin. Two sides to every coin.
Yes.
Right. I've always liked that idea. And so this movie basically being a feature-length comic book version of that was neat for me. But so Maxwell Lord wishes to become, he does the I wish for more wishes thing, and he wishes to become the Wishing Stone. And so that's the catalyst that sets off the whole movie. Now, when he does that, do the people who wished before get another wish through him?
I guess so, because Cheetah goes on to be like, I wish I could be the apex predator for some reason.
Right.
Which I didn't understand that
Same.
much.
They kind of set up because she liked Diana's cheetah print boots and there was a cheetah in her office.
There's a lot of cheetah-related stuff surrounding her. Like, a guy walks by and he's got, like, a cheetah belt or something like that. It's just, like, does she just... Are cheetahs drawn to her in the grand scheme of the universe?
I don't know about the belt thing because I never noticed that, but I know she had one in her office. So I would assume she just likes cheetahs and that's why she liked Diana's shoes, maybe?
I have a lot of issues with this movie, particularly due to the setup. For a movie that's 2.5 hours, it does not seem to dedicate enough time to setting up most of the stories that it wants to pay off.
And it somehow sets up too many things for the pointless stuff, like Cheetah.
It sets up the idea that the president has a way to talk to every screen on Earth at once.
Yeah, that was weird.
Which I love that because it comes out of literally nowhere. Like, Max Lord is talking to the president, he turns around and it's just schematics laid out. It's like, hey, what's all of this that would allow me to touch every person on Earth at once?
Yeah. the science of it all, I'm not smart enough to figure out, and I'm not going to pretend to try and figure out. So I'm just going to ignore that.
It gets a bit of leeway with the technicalities of that. I don't know. I guess you could explain half the movie as like the wishing stone blending reality to push its will forward. But even that's a bit
Yeah, I think you mix that with. I think this movie works. It's so much different tonally than the rest of the DCEU, where this movie almost operates as a science fiction movie as opposed to where the other ones, like the rest of this universe, seems to be like a real. Well, it's like a real world take on comic book movies, which is not my cup of tea, but it is some people's cup of tea, and that's fine. It's like this is our real human world, like the one that us actual people live in, but there's superheroes in it. Whereas this seems to be a little more along the lines of, oh, this is a little like techier science fiction based world where Wonder Woman operates. And I think that still fits with the first movie, given as the first movie takes place in World War I. I think this still fits with that. But this movie feels really disconnected from the rest of that established kind of universe, which isn't a problem for me. I've seen it be a problem for some other people. But DC said probably maybe a year and a half ago now, after Justice League came out, yeah, we're done focusing on the cinematic universe stuff. It hasn't worked out. We're going to focus more on solo movies. So now that they've said that, I kind of take this, as, okay, this is a, Wonder Woman is a saga somewhat disconnected from the rest of this universe, and I can accept that.
Well, I accept that. What I don't accept is any reason this movie should be in 1984. I
don't necessarily love the whole 80s nostalgia trend. However, I think it worked well for this movie, not because it was 80s nostalgia, but because it's very clear to me that one of the things Patty Jenkins was doing was paying homage to, like, the 70s Wonder Woman show and the Richard Donner Superman movies and sort of that era of comic book media. It's very clear that she's, even to the extent of putting Linda Carter in this movie, like she really wants to pay homage to that era of comic book movies. This movie plays tonally a whole lot like the first two Superman movies and a whole lot like that Linda Carter Superman or Linda Carter Wonder Woman series. So I think
the Linda Carter Superman series, yes.
I think that sort of tone and that sort of homage benefited from this movie taking place in the 80s. But outside of that, I agree, there's no real reason for it to take place in the 80s. But I also don't think it hindered the movie necessarily.
Not particularly. It just kind of took me out of it every now and again. I was like, wait, why is all of this happening?
For me, it was like, I just forgot. Until I saw, Steve Trevor in a fanny pack. I kind of forgot that that we were in the 80s at all. Because it doesn't really... The movie doesn't... focus on it.
Admittedly, that's a nitpick more than anything else. It's just like it wasn't a big reason. A big reason would be, why did it take away Maxwell Lord's health and not his connection to his son?
Well, I think that kind of shows. I would agree with you. I would have done it. I think it really kind of did both. But
you can say, it shows he values his health more than his son, but then that contradicts the ending. I don't know. A lot of this movie just kind of felt a bit kind of like it could have, as much as I hate saying it, it should have had more scenes dedicated to stuff in the movie.
I'm going to disagree with you wholeheartedly. It did not need any more scenes at all. I think they did set up the health stuff.
Well, they set up that he needs like vitamins because he gets headaches.
Well, it's not only that he's taking all these vitamins and he's drinking these like fruit smoothies and he's doing all these things for his health. So they did kind of set it up. One of the things I said to you that I think for me gives me a lot more leeway on this movie than I think maybe you have or some other people I've talked to. This movie is a very simple plot. And it's also very complicated because it's got so many different webs. But all of those different webs are super simple stories, almost like a cartoon or like a children's series where it's like it's very bare bones, very simple. Like in a simple story, you have a guy, if you were telling a fairy tale like Cinderella or whatever, You have a guy who's really, he's somewhat health conscious. He's got a relationship with his son, but he takes vitamins and he goes for a jog every morning. When you put that genie story, like what is the genie going to take away from him? Well, of course it's going to be the health thing, because that one is different, and it's kind of a character aspect, whereas relationship with his son is sort of like, you would hope everybody has that. Like, everybody wants a good relationship with their son, whereas not everybody is so focused on their health. So I think it doesn't make sense, like, not that it doesn't make sense. The son thing would have worked better for a deeper story, but I don't think this movie was trying to be that. I think because even like the Richard Donner Superman movies, for instance, super simple plot. Like, the first one is literally Superman becomes Superman, meets Lois Lane, Lex Luthor wants to sell real estate, Superman stops Lex Luthor, that's the end of the movie. So it's this very bare bones simple movie, but it still kind of works because the simplicity kind of drives that story. And I think this one works for me in that same way, but I do see why people don't like this movie as much as me.
Well, I think part of it is, we've spoken about this to a couple of our other friends. People have forgotten what comic book movies are like because no one's seen one in about a year.
Right. Well, that's definitely part of it. I don't necessarily want to use the excuse like, oh, it's a comic book movie, because there are, deeper, headier comic book movies that you do have to think about some stuff, and your actions do have consequences. But then at the same time, there are comic book movies where your actions don't have consequences and things don't matter, that play a whole lot like this, that people like more. So I will say it just the once. It is a comic book movie, and you could compare something like, I would say, let's use Captain America: Civil War, for instance. Like, kind of by the end of that movie, like, there are some leftover consequences because it's a cinematic universe, but by the end, that's also a very simple story. Like, it doesn't you don't have to think much about what's going on. Like, nobody's thinking about like why the planes were in the hangar fueled up in that movie, but they do say it here. Like, people complain about the jet at the Smithsonian being fueled up, whereas nobody said anything about that when it was Captain America: Civil War that did the same thing. And I'm not saying that this is a better movie than Captain America: Civil War, because it's not. And I don't even particularly love Captain America: Civil War. But there are little things like that people are complaining about in this movie, whereas people are nitpicking this movie a whole lot more than I've seen them nitpick a lot of other comic book movies that I would say are equally as nitpickable. And that's the part that's kind of getting under my skin a bit, because I did enjoy it and I did have a lot of fun with this movie. And it's one that I'll probably watch it more than I'll watch the first one, because I got more enjoyment out of it. And the first one kind of bored me. But it is just this simple story. So Maxwell Lord, he becomes the Wishing Stone. But before that happens, and this is something you brought up to me before we were recording, before that happens, Cheetah wishes that she would be more like Diana. And that kind of sends off her story, which I think is the weakest plot of the whole. You have really three main plots. You've got the Maxwell Lord plot, you've got the Steve Trevor and Diana plot, and then you've got the Cheetah plot. And those are really the big three that kind of weave at the same time, which is part of the problem with this movie. You don't need an A, B, and a C plot. You really just need an A and a B plot.
Yeah, it should have been two separate movies. You should have either gone with Wonder Woman versus Cheetah and making it a very down to earth story about a woman and her friend that she makes and how they change and evolve through that. Or you should have done the Maxwell Lord stuff where it's like her and Steve against Maxwell Lord. I don't know, it felt like because they went with it's the classic DC issue of because they went with both, you couldn't flesh out either.
Right.
And I love Maxwell Lord stuff, I should just say. And I think Cheetah's design was really nice. I think I know a lot of people found her final fight to be underwhelming, but I was like, it's good enough.
I enjoyed it, and I really liked her as Cheetah. I think she did a great job in that role, and with that performance, that plot was just kind of tossed to the side, and it's almost like And it was a full fleshed out plot. Like that could have been a whole movie dedicated to that, done and written the same way. And it would have been better because it would have been the focus. But it's almost like that's the plot you kind of forget about. So let's talk about that plot just a little bit more. Like let's kind of run through it.
Well, yeah, like so, Diana meets Barbara at work, and they try and like Barbara's this kind of she's every comic book character that ever since Batman Returns, where they're klutzy and clumsy, and they're like, I'm sorry, I'm just quirky and so weird, and it's like, but then something happens, and then they change to this confident, smooth, just outgoing person. So Barbara meets her. She wishes that she was more like Diana because she thinks Diana's like pretty and cool and outgoing and smart and all these things. And as a result of that, she ends up getting some of her powers. That's why I took. She got some super strength and super speed and stuff.
I think she gets all of her powers.
Right. Well, Diana doesn't have that much power outside of like the lasso, and that's
Right.
not hers. That's something she stole.
Right. Yeah, I think she get shot at one point. I can't remember if Barbara gets shot at some point or not.
And she moves like at super speed and stuff like that.
Right.
But yeah, so that happens, and they're like, "Oh, we need to get Maxwell Lord to renounce his wish," which would then announce all of the wishes to stop everyone dying. And she's like, "No, I like being confident and cool." And she beats up a man because every man in this is some kind of pervert.
Right. Out of the two men that are in the whole movie, other than Maxwell Lord.
Yeah, exactly. But like she beats up this man who previously tried to assault her. It seemed.
Yeah.
Then she ends up saving Maxwell Lord's life because they're trying to stop him. Obviously, and she's like, "No, I want to be this." And she goes, "I wish I was an apex predator." And then she becomes Cheetah. That's kind of it.
Right. And like I said, that's simple, which kind of fits in with the tone of the whole movie, which is something I didn't mind. That's a movie. Like that plot is a movie. It just, you could develop and play out, drop Maxwell Lord entirely from this and play that out as the plot of this movie. Like she wants to keep on being Cheetah, but the Wishing Stone is slowly taking away her goodness and her humanity, because it takes away the thing that you most value, which I guess to her would be her goodness and her humanity. I kind of took that as she wants to be like noticed and set apart from other people. And the thing that sets her apart from other people is her goodness and her humanity. So she gets like, everybody loves her like Diana, but she loses the thing that she valued most. That's kind of how I took that. That's a movie in and of itself. You don't need the Maxwell Lord stuff to flesh out that plot, and you don't need that plot to flesh out the Maxwell Lord stuff. It's so weird and disconnected, and that's my personal biggest issue with the movie is every time Cheetah was on screen, as much as I loved Kristen Wiig in this role, and I thought she was fun to watch, I wanted to get back to Diana and Steve Trevor, or I wanted to get back to Maxwell Lord. Like, I never wanted to stay on her for too long. Like, she'd come on screen and I'd be like, oh, that's fun. And then I'd want to get back to something else. I got tired of it. And that, like I said, my biggest issue with the movie would be that, because it's like, she's not necessary. And the other stuff is so much more interesting. Not that this is bad, but the other stuff is so much more interesting that I would rather be watching that.
Yeah. Well, it's like none of this movie is particularly awful. Like I didn't watch any part of it and go, "Oh, that was just terrible." Other than a few special effects, they must have got the Flash CG team for some of the running parts.
I want to save that for the end because we can both rant about the special effects, but I'll save that.
But yeah, for the most part, the worst that the movie gets is dull or uninteresting.
I could agree with that. I don't know. I wasn't too disinterested the whole time because the most uninteresting stuff in the movie was probably the love story, but their chemistry was so good that I just kind of got sucked into the love story. So even I was never bored by this movie. I will say this to me didn't feel like a 2.5 hour movie, except for the 2 times I had to get up to go pee because the movie's so long. I did find it interesting, and it held my attention. And I do think that benefited from me seeing this in a movie theater. Like, I think me sitting in a movie theater without my phone as a distraction, whatever, like devoting my actual attention to it, I think was a benefit to me, like not being bored by it. But I never got to the point where I was like, oh, this movie is so boring. Like, can we just skip on to the next thing? I just found the other stuff more interesting than I found this thing in particular. And so I'd be like, well, let's get back to this because this is more interesting. And I do think it was paced well in the fact that it did jump around to the more interesting stuff. It knew when to jump back to Maxwell Lord because he's the most interesting part of the movie. And then it knew when to jump back to the love story, and it knew when to jump back to Cheetah. It knew, it's like the movie, it's like Patty Jenkins was sitting behind the camera saying, okay, people are bored now, let's move on. Like, it was like the second I started to get bored with something, it would jump to something else. And I will say I respect the movie a lot for that, because that's a thing that most movies don't know how to do, is jump to the next thing when I'm getting bored.
Yeah. I mean, okay, well, I know we said it a lot, but Pedro Pascal, what a man.
Oh, man.
I'm so happy that he's blowing up now, because he's just fantastic. He chews the scenery. He's having fun every time. And like towards the end, when he looks like a drug addict, like he's got a burst blood vessel in his eye, his veins are popping out, and he's just like hobbling around. It's like, what'd you wish for?
And he's so evil. He is so evil in this movie. It's like we just don't see villains like that anymore. And I loved it. And he did such a good job with it. I will say this right now, while we're talking about Pascal, everybody in this movie, except for Gal Gadot, does a great job with what they're given. Kristen Wiig is fantastic. Chris Pine, of course, is fantastic. Pedro Pascal just blew it out of the water. Like, even that guy who played the president played him almost completely straight in a scene that should have been, that was almost done as like a comedy scene. Like, and the extras and the little, like the guy with the cows, I loved that, where he goes, I told a guy I wanted a farm. I didn't mean I wanted it at my apartment. Like that, like those little extras, They did great. I don't think even the kid, Maxwell Lord's son, I think did a fine job for a child actor. So everybody in this movie, except for Gal Gadot, did a great job with what they're given.
Fun fact about the guy who played not Ronald Reagan in this movie. He was the guy who played Nixon in Doctor Who.
Oh, that's interesting. I don't know why they didn't go with
Ronald. I know. I guess they wanted to stray from being political, but
they were already kind of political with Pedro Pascal.
Yeah, being like an allegory for Trump.
Yeah, he reminded me a lot of what's his name from Gremlins 2. I can't remember his name.
Clamp.
Yes, Clamp. He reminded me a lot of him. And there's a lot of sort of Ted Turner in Pedro Pascal, whereas like Ted Turner from the 80s, where he's like this TV personality and he's got all these huge commercials. And then a bit of Trump in there with the fact that he was kind of like a tycoon of the industry. So I think that's they didn't shy away from that. I don't think it was necessarily intentional that it was supposed to be that, but they certainly didn't shy away from it. So it's interesting that they didn't put Reagan in the movie. I don't know, but I think everyone in this movie takes what they were given and handles it really well, except for Gal Gadot. And I'm really going to stress that. Because she's definitely, acting wise, probably the worst in the movie. I think we'll both agree with that.
You never really see, like, there's some parts where she's almost getting an emotion from me, and I'm just kind of like, there's nothing on her face.
Nothing in the plot took me out of the movie. Like you were saying, the 80s stuff kind of took you out. It didn't really do that for me. Gal Gadot took me out of the movie. Unless she's with Chris Pine, which for whatever reason just keeps me sucked in. Unless she's with Chris Pine, I was just completely sucked out because...
See, I also... One of the other things that took me out of the movie, and probably the only thing I would say is a legitimate complaint I have, is that the lasso of truth has become a huge Deus Ex Machina. Like, they just use that for whatever. Like, oh, it can. my suspension of disbelief goes far when you're talking about Greek gods and mythology and comic book characters and stuff like that. But like, this is a tool that went from being able to lasso people to tell them the truth, which is okay, cool, I got that. And then it's like, oh, it can also whip on lightning. It has infinite length. You can use it to talk through people. You can use it to show people visions. You can use it to make people see what you want to see. It just, I don't know, it got a bit too, like you're going a bit too far for me now, Wonder Woman 84.
I was with it until I completely see what you're saying. I was with it. I was fine with it. Like, I was fine with it showing Steve Trevor the visions, whatever. She just explained it by...
It was the end that tipped me over the edge.
Right. She explained it by, oh, it's not... It doesn't just make you tell the truth. The lasso itself is the truth. And I was fine with that. But then at the end, when, like, all the screens just turned gold for whatever reason, that's when you kind of lost me with the lasso of truth.
Yeah, like, I don't know. Something a bit more defined would have been a bit nicer there. Like...
Yeah. Or set that up.
Yeah. Yeah, I know we said it a lot in this talk, but it's a 2.5 hour movie that doesn't set up anything it needs to set up.
Not that it doesn't set up anything. It doesn't set up a lot of things. It does. It like half set that up, and that's probably the best way I can describe most of the movie.
Well, it's like they remembered. Oh, we need to set stuff up, and so they started the process of set. Like, okay, Bob is a nice guy. Nice girl? How do you show that? Oh, she gives this homeless man hot food. Okay, cool. What else? She stays back late for jobs that wasn't her. Okay, you need to actually tell us that and don't just show us her working after establishing that she doesn't go out much, that she's socially awkward.
Right.
That's it. And then next thing you know, she's an awful person who hates everyone.
It's like it's the bare minimum amount of what we need. The whole movie is in terms of setup specifically. It's the bare minimum of setup we need for this. We need to show that Diana is still hung up on Steve Trevor. Okay, there are pictures in her house. Done. Bam. Bare minimum setup. She mentions him in an offhand comment at dinner. Bam. Setup. Barbara is kind of a loner. Okay, she wears glasses. Bam. Setup. Like, it's like all of these things are the bare minimum. Pedro Pascal wants a relationship with his son. Okay, he's in his office for one scene. Bam, set up. Pedro Pascal cares about his health. Okay, he's drinking a green smoothie and taking vitamins. It's like all of these things, yes, they're set up, but it's like they're set up in
more than one scene.
Right. It's set up in a way that's like I said, bare bones, bare minimum, and you kind of forget it by the time the scene's over because it isn't drawn upon. Like, you forget that was even set up to begin with, and then you just move on to the next thing. And that's sort of kind of the whole movie. It's not like that's one time that happens. The whole movie is that. And that would be another complaint for me. And once again, I got a whole lot of enjoyment out of this movie, so it's not that huge of a complaint.
I didn't hate this movie. For all the complaints I have, like I said, the worst thing that it got was uninteresting.
I think you would have enjoyed it more had you seen it in a theater.
Quite possibly, yes. Immediately seeing it in my room where I had a lot of distractions, and every time it started losing me, I could just kind of look at my phone, and in which case it would have just lost me more and more and more.
Right.
Did not help.
Right. But everything is paid off so big. And this is the same problem that the first Wonder Woman has, too. It's paid off so big and so over the top for such a small setup that the movie feels somewhat unbalanced. And that would probably be a really good way to just kind of finalize my thoughts on the movie. Enjoyable, but it was unbalanced. You could call it like top heavy.
Yeah.
Like the end of the movie is so stuffed full of payoff, whereas the beginning of the movie is so lacking of setup that the whole thing feels like just disbalanced and top heavy, and that makes the ending feel cluttered and the beginning feel pointless.
Well, when I was watching it, like I said earlier, the first half of the movie basically just didn't grab me at all. And then the second half did, and that's because it started paying off all of these things they never really set up in the first place. And it's like, you could cut this movie in half and still have basically the same movie.
Yeah, absolutely. You could release it as a part 1 and part 2. and it would still be feature length because the movie's 2.5 hours.
Yeah. The only movie I've ever seen that was 2.5 hours and even needed to be that long was probably Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, I'm of the
like
minority.
Even Endgame.
I'm of the minority who thinks Lord of the Rings is too long. But
My issue with Lord of the Rings is that I have to read another Bible in addition to the actual Bible to be able to understand it.
Right. Yeah. No, I tend to agree with you. I don't know. Like I said, this movie is just. Like I said, if you can see it in a theater, and I guess we'll kind of wrap up. Oh, we got to talk about special effects. Can't forget that. Let's talk about special effects, and then we'll wrap it up with recommendations.
Simultaneously, fantastic and lacking.
Visually, it was gorgeous. I think it's probably, special effects quality aside, from a visual standpoint, both cinematography and color-wise, the color grading was great. The set pieces were
probably the best thing about it.
Yeah,
Like
well, everything felt gold, and shimmery and shiny, and it. In terms of 80s nostalgia, if you want to talk about that for a second, this was the best way to color grade an 80s nostalgia movie, I think, because it was beautiful looking, and it kind of set that atmosphere, and the sets were great, and the set pieces, the stuff on Themyscira was gorgeous. And even the special effects that they were trying to do were really neat. I know some people have complaints about it. I particularly think the scene where Diana learns to fly, while the special effects are rough, it visually.
Oh, that was another thing. This is a completely different thing from the special effects, but that came out of nowhere for me.
Yeah, they have set it up when they're in the jet. Yes, when Steve and Diana are in the jet, he says that all flying is just floating on the air. They stole that from Toy Story. He out loud says right.
And then she hears it back when she starts flying. But I don't know. There's no hint to her being able to do that at all.
I do think it's less along the lines of how Superman can fly. I do think it is more along the lines of just she's riding the wind kind of thing. I think that makes more sense in my brain with what they set up. But once again, it's bare minimum setup for a big payoff. It's the same issue that we were already talking about. But I think that scene looks nice, special effects aside, like what they were trying to do looks nice. Her swinging on the lightning, what they were trying to do looks nice. But the special effect, it feels like the special effects are incomplete.
Yeah, that's probably the best way to put it. Which is weird considering that the movie got delayed.
I said before I really started thinking about the delays and stuff, what it felt like to me was they said, okay, this is home release, just turn in what you've got. Let's just wrap up the special effects as quick as we can and turn it in. It's only going to home release. It's not, whatever. That's what it felt like. But that's probably not it, because the movie was supposed to come out a year ago. So
it's meant to come out in summer.
Right. So it's they had extra time to work on it, so you would think they would perfect these, but the movie was supposed to be done by then. The last 3 months, I wouldn't think are that special effects heavy in terms of development. So I don't know, but the special effects looked rough, and the costume, our friend Colin pointed out to me that, because I noticed something was off about the costume, so I asked him what was the deal, and he explained to me basically they made Diana's costume, instead of making it out of a hard plastic like they made her previous costume out of, they made it out of a silicone rubber, which I would assume is for Gal Gadot's convenience, but you can really tell in the way that it moves.
It's worse whenever it moves. It's worse because it looks like it creases.
Yeah, and the even worse than her main costume was the chicken suit at the end. That one just really, she's laying on the ground and it's literally crimped up in the corners. It's that shouldn't happen. This thing is made of solid gold.
Yeah. I don't know. Final thoughts.
Yeah, let's do recommendations. So, give it a rating out of 10, and would you recommend it?
Okay, so this is from an at-home standpoint of watching it. I would probably give it just like I mean, it's a bit, but I'd probably go with a 5. Like it's like I say, straight down the middle. It isn't a great movie. It's not an awful movie. It's good to watch midday when you're tired and there's nothing on TV.
Okay. I would give it, number one, formal recommendation. If you can see this movie in the theater, do it. If you have, well, of course, stay safe. Stay safe. If you don't feel comfortable going to a movie theater, I completely understand that. If your theater's not distancing and all that kind of stuff, that's a completely different story. If you can safely go see this in a movie theater, do it. You're going to get a whole lot more enjoyment out of. If you are going to watch this movie at home, do your best to kind of limit those distractions if you really want to try to get some enjoyment out of it. Because I do think, I know I would have enjoyed it less had I been able to just get on my phone at the points that lost me. But then the movie kind of corrects itself in that, and you're going to miss that from watching it at home unless you limit those distractions. So
yes,
I'm going to give it.
I think it's also worth stating that if you're someone who really wants to watch this movie, but you also want to socially distance and you want to stay safe, watch it at home. You'll get you'll get much more enjoyment out of it than I will. I watched it because it's a comic book movie that I knew I'd probably wanted to check out at some point, but I wasn't like fully interested. If you're one of those people who really wants to watch this movie, you're really excited, you will get just as much enjoyment from it as you would in a movie theater.
Yeah, I also made you watch it so we would talk about it on the podcast. Like, you didn't have a choice to watch this movie.
No, I've got something else to watch for next week.
Yes, and we'll wrap up with that. I'm gonna give this movie a 7 out of 10, because I did really. This is a movie that I'm going to watch again. I liked it better than I liked the first Wonder Woman, which I haven't heard many people say, but I also don't particularly care for the first Wonder Woman. And my favorite part of that movie was done better in this movie, which we didn't really talk about. My favorite part of the first Wonder Woman is the fish out of water storyline, because I'm a sucker for a good fish out of water story. And this movie does that better, with a better actor and a better written character being the fish out of water. So I enjoyed this one more. For that reason. And I think it's at the same time, it pains me to say that this is a beautiful looking movie, because it's not at the same time. Like, it's both gorgeous and really bad looking at the same time. But like I said, 7
it's
out of 10.
very 50-50.
Right. 7 out of 10. Once again, if you can stay safe, make sure safety is your first priority. Don't risk your life to go see Wonder Woman 84. It's not worth it, I promise. But if you can stay safe, go check it out in a theater. I have a local theater here, so maybe check out one of those. It's much smaller. There aren't a whole lot of people, that kind of thing. So I was able to stay safe. But if you do watch it at home, try to limit those distractions, because I do think that the movie will benefit from limited distractions. Like, even if you get bored, maybe don't take out your phone. Maybe before you go to bed, like the last 2 hours before you go to bed, plug your phone up and watch this movie. And then you'll probably get a little more enjoyment out of it. But yeah, like I said, I would definitely recommend it, especially if you're excited to see it, because I wasn't particularly excited.
It was better than I thought it would be.
Right. It was significantly better than I thought it was going to be. I went into this movie expecting to fully hate it. But yeah, it's fun. It's enjoyable. 7 out of 10.
Yeah.
Well, you didn't give it a 7 out of 10. You gave it a 5, Josh.
Yeah, no, I'm just trying to. I'm thinking back on my ideas. I'm just like, maybe I boosted up to a 6, because it did claw up a lot back for me from some of the performances. But yeah, I'd say ultimately go watch it at some point. Don't risk your life for it, but
absolutely not.
Take a viewing for it.
I don't want people to think that me saying see this movie in a theater means I need to risk my life to see Wonder Woman 84, because you don't. You absolutely don't. I didn't risk my life to go see it. There were it was the most people I've seen, because my theater here is doing. I saw Tenet in the theater, and my theater locally, they do classic movies while there aren't movies coming out, just so that they don't have to shut their doors. So I go see those every now and then, and there's usually 2 other people in the entire auditorium. So I'm pretty safe distance. And there were 7 in Wonder Woman 84. It was the most people I've seen in a movie theater since the pandemic hit. But I was still safe and distance, whatever. Don't risk your life for this movie. But if you do have a safe opportunity to see it in a movie theater, I think you'll enjoy it significantly more than seeing it at home.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. But yeah, this has been a good talk. I'm very excited for what we have to talk about next week.
Are we going to set it up? Are we going to explain what we're going to do next week? Because I haven't been this excited for a podcast topic in a long time.
If you want to go talk about it, you can talk about it.
Let's do it. Okay, so next week, because we need to give people homework, our regular listeners who listen week to week, we need to give them homework so that, because next week we're going to be talking spoilers like nobody's business. So your homework this week is to watch season 1 and at least start season 2, because it's going to take you more than a week to get through, of Twin Peaks. Is it on Netflix for you?
No, for us it's on Now TV or Sky if you have either of those. Other than that, use totally legal methods of trying to watch it. Cinemax have it. No, not Cinemax. Criterion have it, which is a channel you can get on Amazon Prime if you're like me and you like watching stuff actually legally.
Right. It's on Netflix if you're in America, just so you're clear. Watch season 1 of Twin Peaks, start season 2. We're going to be doing a full deep dive into season 1, and then we'll follow that up with a discussion of season 2. Then we're going to talk about the film Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me, and then we will do the 4th part in this little saga, Twin Peaks The Return, which is on Showtime. So your homework for now is to start Twin Peaks if you haven't seen it, and go through it, because like I said, I haven't been this excited to talk about something on the podcast in a very long time.
I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah.
But this has been a good talk. We'll see you all next week. And that has been Josh and Dalton from Semi Pro.